Welcome back. I hope you're enjoying our little leadership talks. These talks will form part of seminars that hopefully will be delivered primarily to Emmanuel Assemblies, but also to other pastors in the regions around Southern Africa. We're still looking at mentoring. This is going to be our last little talk on mentoring. You might say, why have I done so many about one subject? Because I believe the future of the church rests not just in the generation of leaders we currently have, but in the group of leaders that will come on after us, after you and me. It's vital that we make sure that there are leaders who are capable of carrying on the work of the gospel when we can't do it anymore, when we have passed on. We've been looking at the relationship primarily between Ruth and Naomi, and we're going to look at the final chapter of Ruth, just in synopsis there, to see what actually happens towards the end of this story. Some amazing things happen there in Ruth chapter 4. What we see underlying this is that the younger overtakes the older one. The one being mentored overtakes and surpasses the one who has done the mentoring. So the startling fact that this is the hardest transition that a leader will have in his or her life. Potentially it can make or break their legacy. One of the problems that we often encounter in the Christian church is that when a leader's time has come to hand over the reins to the next generation, they struggle with doing so. They struggle with letting go. They struggle with pride and ego and all kinds of things. In this chapter, in Ruth chapter 4, we're given an example of a gracious, godly woman who then becomes the servant of the one that she has mentored for many years. Are we prepared for that moment? Now, if you're a young person being mentored, you probably think you're ready right away. And you might be. But the chances are you still got some work to do on your character, on holiness, on all these issues. If you're someone that's mentoring someone, the hardest thing can be is to hand over. See, what we expect to do, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, we expect everyone coming behind us to pay the same cost as us. But let me tell you something, the cost to reach this generation is different than the cost older ministers have had to pay to reach their generation. Culture, as I mentioned before, has changed, has shifted somewhat. Language has changed. Bible knowledge has changed. In my culture, 50 years ago, people would have a good grasp of Scripture because everybody would go to Sunday school. Now they don't. And so we minister, certainly in Europe, into a biblically illiterate culture. There are all kinds of things that will change, that will mean the price that is paid today is going to be different to the price that was paid yesterday. Don't expect people to pay the same price you have paid. It will be a different price. Now, what do we find in Ruth chapter 4? Well, we find that Ruth marries Boaz, and they have a son. Now, actually, Ruth marrying Boaz, just a little aside here, is something really interesting. There's something, a little nugget for you to take away. You can preach this on a Sunday. There's no copyright on this. You could use this in your own sermon. But it's interesting that Boaz, a much older man than Ruth, marries Ruth. Why does he do that? Well, we read in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5 that Boaz is the son of a man called Salmon. And Salmon is an interesting man himself. We only read one verse about him, but he married a woman who was rescued from Jericho. He marries a woman called Rahab. And so Boaz is the son of Rahab and Salmon. And actually, they find themselves all in the genealogy of Jesus himself. Just read it there in Matthew chapter 1. Boaz marries Ruth. He rescues Ruth from the life that she is living because his own father rescued Rahab from the life and the reputation that she had that went before her. And in doing so, they became part of the genealogy of Jesus, because Rahab had converted to faith and all this, but she was not an honourable woman, if you read there of her accounts in the book of Joshua. Here's my point. Boaz was mentored and nurtured by his father to become a rescuer, and then he rescues Ruth himself. So a little aside, what are we mentoring and what are we modelling rather for our children and our families? Are we showing them what it is, how to treat women or how to treat their husband? Are we showing them how to be godly? Are we showing them how to rescue? Now, if we look further into chapter 4, we begin to discover that there are several things that happen in the relationship, the mentoring roles, but also the relationship between Naomi and Ruth. You see, we know that Ruth has had a son. Ruth now has new status and new influence. She is now married to the most important man in the community. He's one of the city elders. He's respected, and therefore, vicariously, by the marriage, she is also respected. She has been taken from someone who has just come in, a foreigner, someone who is not really known, someone who's converted to the faith, but actually is just this daughter-in-law of Naomi, and the husband has died, and all these things that have swirled and been talked about in the community. But now Ruth is in a position of status and influence. She's gone from a widow, a pagan woman, to being a God-fearing lover of Yahweh. And she becomes the great-grandmother of King David himself. She's become the person God wanted her to be. She has been promoted in the kingdom of God. Ruth has now surpassed, overtaken Naomi in terms of influence, because she has become important in the community. She's overtaken Naomi in terms of income, because now she has the wealth of her husband, and we know from our previous talk she's an industrious, faithful woman. She's able to generate income. But she's become the one now who is providing for Naomi in her old age, because actually now she has wealth. Naomi is now safe because her student, the one she has mentored, is no longer the student but has been promoted. Naomi also has a new role. She's no longer the mentor, she's no longer the guide for Ruth. Although I'm sure Ruth holds her in deep affection and will honor her and love her, but the relationship has changed. The new role that Naomi has is that she now looks after the baby. She is looking after her own grandchild, but she is permanently there. She's providing the childcare. She's nurturing even the generation after her job with Ruth has been done. Now she has the opportunity to nurture the next generation. In English, we would call her a nanny. In some respects, she is an unpaid nanny. She's unpaid childcare worker, but she has a relationship. It's important to note that in this role, she is no longer the chief influencer and the chief guide in life for Ruth. That is transferred to Boaz. She is now married to Boaz. The Bible speaks about two becoming one. She is now under his influence, under his guidance. As a married couple, they're forging forward together. Now here's the key. Naomi is content in this new role. Naomi is content in this new role. Having done all she can, she is now content. One of the greatest problems, as I've said, is knowing when to hand over for Christian leaders, knowing when to step back, knowing when to step down, knowing when to retire, knowing when to move on. One of the hardest decisions that we will make. If we believe that the ministry we are in cannot survive without us, we have built the ministry around ourselves and not on kingdom principles. If we believe that the ministry cannot survive without us, or the church that we're pastoring cannot survive without us, even if we planted that ministry or church, we have not built that ministry on church, on kingdom principles. We have not built it on Jesus. We've built it on self. We've built it on what we can achieve. Naomi will naturally nurture the young child. His name is Obed. She will do that. She doesn't seek to be in charge of Ruth anymore. She's happy with the transition. We need to be gracious as Christian leaders when our task is over, when we've run the course of that particular season, when we have achieved what God called us to achieve in that ministry. We need to be gracious and hand over to capable leaders, those that we've mentored, those we've nurtured, to grow up and replace us, because that's what we call succession leadership. When the task is done, it's okay to retire, it's okay to move on to the next field of service. It's all right to do that. But when we do, we mustn't offer advice unless they ask for it, but we must cheer them on, for their successes are our successes. When I've left churches and other pastors have taken on, when things have gone well, I've celebrated. When things have gone badly, I've just prayed all the more unless they ask for my advice. Because when something goes well in the church that you've left or a ministry that you've left, particularly if you've been involved in the mentoring and raising up the future leader, if it goes well, that also reflects well on you, because you have done your job well in enabling and equipping the next generation of leadership. So here's some questions for you. Is it your time to hand over? If it is, do so graciously. Prepare it, plan it, and enact it. Make sure you do it. Is it your time to serve a little longer if you're being mentored, to be raised up to be the leader you can be? If it's your time, take over gracefully. Never speak badly of your predecessor or what they have done. Always speak well of them in public and in private. But if it is not time yet, if it is not the time for you to retire or move on, if it is not the time for you to take over a ministry, don't try and force the issue to make it happen, because something that you have to learn is that Jesus, even though he had equality with God, did not consider equality with God something to be held on to. It's in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 11. Don't grasp at something, you'll end up damaging it. But maybe, having looked at these little talks, having seen this little talk, maybe it's time for you to begin to plan that if it's in a year, 2 years, 5 years' time, where you'll be moving on, where someone will be taking over, that you begin to make sure that succession, that plan works well for you, works well for your church and for your ministry organization. These are challenging thoughts, ones that will challenge our ego, one that will challenge our pride. But without doing this, we will find that the ministry itself will suffer. And if a ministry suffers, it's actually the people within that ministry that are suffering, not just the name of the ministry. So plan well, think well, pray well into these matters. God bless you.